what truth do you choose to present when you're cutting a documentary?
How do you incorporate that into an emotional story?
It was just the easiest, most succinct way to do it.
And this kicked my ass, but this was one of the best jobs I ever had.
Coming into this project, I think that we were very aware of all the challenges. You know, the story of the Beatles, the story of George Harrison and the Beatles, it's so well known, and yet it's also kind of been sanitized, that the Beatles have almost become a brand. And one of the real challenges was to take it back a little bit. The challenge of telling a story that's very well known, and a challenge of telling a story that's already been told a different way.
Would be happy just to love you. Double track.
The challenge became, you know, how can you make it as personal as possible? We had all this extraordinary material. Most of those photographs that you saw were shot by George himself. We had access. George was almost an archivist. He had home movies. He had diaries. He always kept everything. So how do you use that to best effect? Another way to put it is, we felt like it was an opportunity to, like, what would it feel like to be a Beatle? You know, like, what's it like to be 19 years old, you know, from a little provincial town, and have everything that everybody appears to want, money, fame, women. What's that like at such an early age to get that and not really, and realize that you don't really want it?
No, actually, it's quite lucky, because we've been together now for 40 years, and you know, we've all been mates for quite a long time, so we don't get on each other's nerves as much as we could.
The director was very aware of a lot of the danger in the story. You know, there's a whole generation that, or many people in that generation, who felt a close connection to the Beatles or to George Harrison, and they have their own version of the story in their head. It's, you know, it's the soundtrack of their youth. That's another way of putting it. I think it was very clear from the beginning, well, this is a story about George Harrison. These are the things you have to deal with, and there were maybe 9 or 10 things, like Eric Clapton and Patti Boyd, like growing up in Liverpool, Beatlemania. But how it would all fit together, and how George's musicality would come through, and his spirituality. How do you, something so esoteric as Indian spirituality, how do you incorporate that into an emotional story? And a lot of it was talking, you know, and a lot of it was putting the pieces in place. We knew where, you know, how it would end from the very beginning, and just very slowly, day by day, figuring out the story. And it's true that the story from like 62 to 74, which is the end of his 3rd solo album, every time I went into a section, and each section is about 10 or 12 minutes, it would end up completely different than what I had imagined, you know. And on the one hand, on the other hand, it all seems, you know, obvious now. Like, that's what the story is.